Giles Brown. Let's talk.
Right then, I'm not sure about Band on the Run, but the subject of my next interview was probably on the run. Victorian London's most notorious female gang leader, the life of Mary Carr, Queen of the 40s. In the shadows of Victorian London, Mary Carr began her criminal career as a pickpocketing flower girl. Well, truth is stranger than fiction, and the lady to tell me all about this is the author of this fascinating new biography about Victorian London's most notorious female gang leader, Emma Woodhouse. Emma, good morning to you.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on the show.
Do we find you in some pickpocketing sort of Fagan's den in the back streets of London somewhere? Whereabouts are you this morning?
I'm actually in very rainy Shropshire.
Well, there can be some very sort of dark corners of Market Drayton, so we'll let you get away with that one. Right then.
True.
So tell me a little bit about then how you came across the life of Mary Carr. Who she was.
Yeah, so I started, I discovered Mary Carr in 2021 when I was writing a different book. So I was writing a book about a fictional character, and I wanted something to do with Victorian London for her to interact with. And I went through lots of old newspapers and discovered this gang that instantly sort of drew me to them. So actually Mary Carr's in 3 books that I've written, and the first book was written. Well, I started writing it in 2021, and that was when I realised that there was a larger story to tell. She wasn't just going to be contained in this sort of fictional novel that I was writing. I wanted to know more about her, so I spent the next sort of 3-4 years really looking into her history. So now I've got her as a fictional character in one book. I've got a novel about her life, and then my non-fiction book with pen and sword has just come out as well. So
I mean, it sounds like something. It's almost like it's sort of the Tim Burton dark version of Pygmalion, isn't it? She is this. She's this little flower seller, and if it was a Disney novel, then she would be she would go she would get a room somewhere, but she goes sort of she goes female Fagin, doesn't she? And pick a pocket or two, and so she's a Victorian. What's her background? When did you first come across that kind of thing in terms of the actual the archives?
Yeah, so in my first sort of knowledge of her came from newspaper articles, and there was a large sort of amount of articles about her second arrest in 1896. So she was arrested for kidnapping a child from Epsom Racecourse. So it was all very juicy, and lots of newspaper articles. And when you look into it, there were different views of her. So some people thought she really mistreated him, that he was suffering from horrible sort of diseases that we won't mention on the radio after he was found. But other articles talked about how much she loved children, how she spoiled him rotten, and how she took him around with her, and he loved her. He pronounced in court that he loved her, and he tried to climb over the docks to get to her when he gave his evidence in court. So there were these sort of opposing viewpoints of her, really, and she definitely had quite a dark side, but she also had this other side that, you talk about Disney, she liked to look after people, she liked children, she gave money to families whose fathers or whatever were in prison, and so she had this kind of duality of her personality that was absolutely fascinating as well.
But to go from this is an extremely sort of, because people go on about Victorian era, but it's either they're either very, very moral, or it's the dark side, isn't it? There's very little grey area. So we can go to that whole sort of a Christmas, every Christmas we get those Victorian Christmas and the whole thing. But if you are, but the richer are allowed to be, moralistic on one side of it, but on the other hand, be completely, Janus faced about this thing. But it is a male society. And so for a pickpocketing flower girl to become this isn't the London Peaky Blinders. How does she manage to sort of become the leader of a gang? Because if you are the poorest of the poor selling flowers, I don't know, in Covent Garden, Southwark, where she is, generally there weren't a lot of career options, and your life could go pretty downward, couldn't it? And you could end up in all sorts of trouble rather than being the head of a female gang. So how does she do it?
Yeah. So she was very, very good at blackmail, essentially. So, what you'll see I don't know if people might have seen Peaky Blinders is obviously brilliant, but A Thousand Blows on Disney Plus, which has Mary Carr as a character.
Okay.
Now, in that, Mary Carr is she's wielding pistols. Her girls are robbing sort of big stores in London. Now, that wasn't Mary Carr's style, in fact. That was a later sort of gang leader that kind of went into that. So they've sort of amalgamated her and a later gang leader from the 1920s called Alice Diamond. What Mary Carr was very good at was blackmailing men. She knew men's weak points, and she would... one of her ploys was to dress up. She'd like to dress up to look a little bit younger than she actually was and act very vulnerable on the streets and ask a gentleman to escort her to her aunt's house or to the omnibus stop. And then she would invariably have girls waiting in the shadows. They would jump out. They would accuse him of acting immorally towards her, and then they would bribe him for his silence. So she made about £400 once from a judge doing this. Now, £400 back then was a lot of money, and men would just pay for their silence. So she made an awful lot of money doing that, and she also made a lot of money fencing, or what they call mosquing, which was basically getting rid of stolen goods for people. She was very good at that as well. So those were two sort of huge sources of income for her, really.
I suppose one of the other things is that if she is managing to blackmail, it shows a level of intelligence, a level of cunning, but also she must be presentable, because not if you were going to entice a high street judge to follow you, you've got to look a little bit prim and proper. It wouldn't be any sort of street Jenny who he'd go after. So presumably she's got an education, or she's got a natural intelligence, and presumably
she was.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was beautiful. She was described by an artist's model as having violet eyes and glorious hair, and she was actually talent spotted almost by the president of the Royal Academy, Frederick Leighton, who was an artist. Saw her in Piccadilly and stopped his carriage and asked her to model for him, and so she was an artist's model as well. So yeah, she was not a sort of plain sort of pockmarked kind of girl of the street who was struggling. She was eye-catching, and they called her the swan-necked beauty.
The swan-necked beauty. Okay, fair enough. So presumably she can move through all echelons of society then, if she's being stopped by Leighton of the Royal Academy. But she must be quite, so far, so like I said, so Disney Plus character, but she must be quite ruthless to run a gang in Victorian London. It's not all girls together and girl power, is it? Presumably, she must have a ruthless streak as well.
Oh, definitely. And when she was arrested for kidnapping the child, while she was in prison, she had actually sort of named somebody when she was arrested and said, I bet it was so-and-so. And so the lady in question, her name was Annie Hart, and she exacted some revenge upon Mary. She went to Mary's house, they broke in, they stole things, smashed the place up. Now, when Mary got out of prison, she started to hunt down those people who had exacted revenge upon her, and also she was aware of a man who went to the police about the boy being at her house as well by this time. And she had the living daylights beaten out of him, and he was chucked out of his lodgings. So, she had people behind her that could do things. Also, Annie Hart, whilst Mary was in prison, a stonemason who was also a boxer went round and smashed up this woman's coffee house, they called it, but it was probably a place of ill repute. So she had people behind her that would absolutely do the business for her. She didn't necessarily need to get her hands dirty herself, because she had people who followed her.
But presumably she must, there are obviously sort of male gangs as well running around, So how does she find a niche she fits into so she doesn't cross paths with them? Because as we said, it's presumably it's probably a female gang.
Yeah. There were lots of gangs in London.
Yeah.
Mary's gang was actually in a lot of the newspaper reports and things that you'll read about her now, because she's a little bit more in the public eye, they call them the 40 Elephants. But Mary was actually the leader of a gang called the 40 Thieves. The 40 Elephants weren't around until the 1920s.
Right.
And some people believe that Mary's gang sort of evolved into the 40 Elephants. But there were lots and lots of gangs in London, also called 40 Thieves. Gang life was quite a sort of prolific thing, really, amongst the sort of criminal classes, because there's safety in numbers. So, lots of gangs had different sort of outlooks on how they made their money. So, some of them were horse thieves. Some of them were rampers. They made a lot of money at the races, kind of with invisible ink, putting on bets, and then the invisible ink would sort of go away, and you'd make a load of money that way. So there were lots and lots of different gangs doing different rackets at the time. So, she definitely did find her niche, but she was also living amongst a lot of very strong women. So although her being a strong leader and a gang leader was, it was quite unusual, there were a lot of very strong criminal women at that time, and there were a lot of strong criminal women that were living very close by her as well, and so there were rivalries, absolutely.
And she's Southern based, isn't she? So she's not East End. Yeah. We're not talking sort of Docklands, and so that's
no.
That's a particular turf, then, is it?
Yeah. So she lived on Stamford Street for a while, and Stamford Street was a place where there were lots of houses of ill repute. There were lots of public houses. There were lots of sort of rundown places, lots of things going on. And Mary was living in the midst of this, and she knew how to survive in those streets. She'd made herself a name in those streets. And she was quite a force to be reckoned with, really.
And presumably, I mean, the police force per se, it's not really. Are they kind of letting sort of the gangs get on with it pretty much themselves? And places, I mean, because the police force isn't really it's not as we understand it today, is it?
No, there were places in London where the police were afraid to go, for sure. The police, however, when it came to Mary, they knew her. I mean, bobbies had their beat, didn't they? So bobbies all knew they knew people by sight, a lot of them. And so they'd been watching Mary for a while when they did arrest her in 1896 anyway. But they knew who the criminals were in their areas. And so... it was a sort of police force that almost kind of, they were familiar to each other. When they came into her house to arrest her in 1896, the officer actually called her Polly, which was her nickname. Right. Which is quite amusing, really, because obviously there was no sort of formality about it. I've come to see you, Polly, sort of thing. And so the police kind of knew who they were dealing with a lot of the time.
So how does, I mean, okay, so she's this female gang boss. She looks after, families of those who have of a gang who are in prison, etc. So how does this whole thing with a kid then come up? I mean, this is your chink to sort of show a human side, because we can look at people from the past very 2D, can't we? Yeah, and we tend to think, okay, or we have a caricature, but this is confusing, and this shows us a side to maybe to Mary, but I mean, as is real. So it's Michael McGee, isn't it? This young boy. So explain a little bit about how this all happens then.
So Mary went to the City and Suburban race at the Epsom Racecourse, which was a massive deal back in those days. Lots of people went, and they sort of walked and in the roads, and they kind of travelled there. And Mary went along with the lady that she would later accidentally name when she was arrested, who then would carry out the revenge attack on Annie Hart, and her husband Isaac, and another chap called Phil Oker. And they got to the races, and there were lots of booths set up. It was very much like a sort of entertainment sort of atmosphere around the place. And there was a lady called Bridget McGee who was selling race cards. So they were just cards with information on it about the races and sort of the odds, the horses, and she was selling race cards, and she got her little boy with her. Now, Bridget was, she also had two older sons. She'd left her husband. The older sons were with her husband. She'd taken the little one with her. And she was sleeping under hedges, moving between race courses with this little boy who had a beautiful head of blonde curls, was very angelic looking. And Mary clearly took a shine to him. And she allegedly asked Phil Oker to grease it with him back to her place, is what she said, which meant, sort of whip him up and get him back to my place quick. And obviously we've got newspaper reports of what was said in court. And we have to take them with a bit of a pinch of salt because obviously... Mary would be saying her side of the story and other people would be saying theirs. And we've got the Old Bailey records as well. Allegedly, Mary didn't know where the boy came from. She told the courts that she had no idea when she got home he was at her house and she presumed he was the son of Phil Oker, and Phil had... dropped him off and asked her to look after him because he knew how much she loved children. Whereas Phil said that she'd told him to grease it back to her place with the boy and that he'd smuggled him out under the seat of his horse and cart. But the boy stayed with Mary for about 11 months and she nicknamed him Billy Hurley and she dressed him up in clothes and took him around the place, told people that he was hers. And, the police had been sort of keeping an eye out, but children weren't an oddity in Mary's household. She was known to love children. She would buy sort of kids' shoes on the street and things like that. So, it wasn't until the police were sort of given a tip off that they kind of swarmed in. So it was. She's not a 2D person at all. She was very, very complex. As a character, I think. And
presumably, this has got all the ingredients. I mean, we're not quite in the Penny Dreadful because nobody's been dropped in a bath of acid yet or something like that. But again, there is there is an appetite for this. This is late Victorian, almost Edwardian period. This is at the height of... what we would now call the mainstream, the popular media, the London Illustrated News, which may sound quaint now, but was massive. It was the main source. So something like this, beautiful woman, head of criminal gang, angelic child, because hey, which Victorian doesn't love a babe in distress story? Mm-hmm. I mean, and so obviously it goes to the highest courts in the land. Yeah,
absolutely. So, basically, when the child was discovered, they whipped him off to the Lambeth workhouse, to the infirmary there, and they held him there. And then they had to trace his mother. Now, some people think that his mother actually sold him to Mary Carr, and then some people think that he was kidnapped, and then other people, so we've got all these sort of theories. And basically, when the court hearing was done, his mother didn't have him back. He was sent off to a little boys' home, a Catholic home for boys. And in the court hearing, he said he loved Mary, and she was his mother now, sort of thing. And but he was taken away, and she was shoved in prison, and he was put in a little boys' home, not given back to the mother who allegedly wanted him anyway. So, whether that was because she couldn't afford to keep him, whether she thought a Catholic home for boys was a good upbringing for him. But that little boy grew up without a mother of any sort after all of that. So that there's this huge sort of pity there and shame there that maybe he could have been the turning point for Mary. Maybe she did not go straight after she came out of prison. She got back to it. But if she had kept that son, would things have been different?
And presumably, is there payback time when Mary gets out? But and again, if you're not at the top of your... people will say, there's amongst thieves. But if you're not there every day running your gang, there are likely to be sort of, it makes Game of Thrones look like play school, isn't it? Let's face it. Somebody else will try and take over. Somebody will muscle in your turf. Yeah. 3 years away in a Victorian prison is not going to do anybody any good. But when she gets out again, she is presumably starting from zero.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And there was another woman who wanted her title. So there was a woman called Minnie Duggan, and Minnie Duggan was like the antithesis of Mary. So Minnie Duggan was impulsive, violent. She would beat someone up for an umbrella. She was quite a sort of...
she was not a swan-necked beauty and an artist model, you mean?
Absolutely not. And she wanted the title. So literally as soon as Mary was banged up, Minnie Duggan was in all the papers getting arrested for various things, calling herself the queen of the 40 Thieves. And and for very small misdemeanors, Minnie Duggan was banged up, and she would beat up blokes and sort of rob them. And whereas Mary was much more subtle. Yeah. And so when Mary did come out, you've got Minnie Duggan in and out of prison, sort of calling herself the Queen of 40 Thieves. Mary wasn't known as the Queen of the 40 Thieves after that. there was payback. Michael Parker, who was the chap who went to the police and sort of told them that she had the child, Michael McGee, he had the living daylights beaten out of him and was kicked out of his lodgings by his lodging housekeeper, who said she would not tolerate a policeman under her roof, aka a grass.
Right.
And then Mary started to fence items. She got in with a chap called Charles Harvey, who was stealing expensive stuff from big hotels. And he had a gang of sort of men that did that. And Mary sort of started to affiliate herself with them. And her next arrest was because of him and his inability to get rid of stolen goods. He kept a stolen walking cane that was recognised by the chap that it was stolen from ridiculously, and so it all sort of blew up from there.
We kind of like, rather than Minnie Duggan who's going around, brawling in the streets and whatever and gouging people's eyes out with a hairpin or something like that. I can see why you're drawn to Mary Carr, because there is that almost that motherly feeling. Did she have any children of her own?
No, she didn't.
Now, you see, so therefore, therein, perhaps she couldn't have children. That might have been one of the reasons.
Yeah.
And plus also, it's blackmail. It's a bit of pickpocketing.
Yeah.
It's fencing stuff stolen from the rich and expensive. This is, not that we here at Talk Radio we would ever condone crime, but if you wanted to go back and do a Victorian crime, ripping off sort of walking canes and gentlemen's, gentlemen's pocket watches is a sort of thing you want to do rather than oppressing the poor, I suppose, isn't it, Emma?
Yeah, absolutely. And she was, a lot of people who've read about her have said she was a bit like a Robin Hood, robbing from the rich, giving to the poor.
Yeah.
It's a romanticised version of her, of course, because, she did have a dark side and she could be ruthless when she needed to be. But she had a sense of class almost and style, I suppose, so she wasn't brawling in the streets as such. She was sort of fencing those sort of more expensive goods from those posh hotels, and it was from people who could afford to lose them, essentially.
It's really interesting you mentioned this whole thing about the 40 Elephants being the 20s, because we mentioned Peaky Blinders just at the beginning, but that has got people interested in gangs of, old school gangs in a way that haven't before. And you can see that it's a very attractive arc, isn't it, to look at Victor? Because when you think about how women in crime in Victorian London goes, it's generally they're street walking, or they're running houses of ill repute, or they're ending up at the wrong end of Jack the Ripper, and so, or then squalid stuff, and they're dying of some horrible disease and whatever. So, I can see why you want to write about Mary Carr. Do you wish you can't? If you did have that time machine, would you nip back and see how things were doing?
Oh, absolutely! I'd love to. Yeah, she'd probably hate me, but yeah, it would be amazing to see everything in action. And
how, looking at the transcripts of like the court, all the archives of which there are many, and also the transcripts of the Old Bailey, does her personality come through in this? Are there sort of almost quotes verbatim from her?
Oh, yeah, definitely. The Old Bailey records, they're sort of taken as part of the trial, aren't they? But she was very cagey in those, and you could tell that she was working towards creating confusion. So she would name people just sort of ad hoc, or she would say she'd received a letter, but it hadn't reached her, actually. It had gone to such and such a place, and she didn't know about this. And it was all very much, she was bringing out the confusion, and it did remind me of a naughty schoolgirl trying to get out of trouble by just kind of weaving this web that it's very difficult to unravel to try to get to the bottom of it.
What are you hoping that people are going to discover about Victorian London's most notorious female gang leader?
So if you read the book, you'll discover all about her whole life, really. And it looks at how she kind of disappeared from the records afterwards. And you'll also discover about her contemporaries and people that she knew. Those are also in the book. Her lovers, her love life, that's in the book. And also all the research behind it. I'm not going to push one particular agenda. What I do is I lay out the evidence, say this could have happened, but this could also mean that this happened. And so, the reader can kind of look at the evidence for themselves.
The book is called Victoria's London's Most Notorious Female Gang Leader, The Life of Mary Carr, Queen of the 40. It's by Emma Woodhouse, who we're speaking to today. Emma, if people want to follow you online and say lovely things to you, where's the best place to find you?
You can find me on Facebook, Emma Woodhouse Books. You can also find me on Twitter and you can find me on X as well.
And you can order the book via our own virtual bookstore. The book is called Victorian London's Most Notorious Gang Leader, The Life of Mary Carr, Queen of the 40, by Emma Wood. Emma, it's been absolutely brilliant to speak to you today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been fun.